Thanks for getting those emails out. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Hi, Suzanne.
Yes.
Hi, this is David. My camera is not working, so I'm gonna sign off and then log back in.
Okay.
Hi, Shawn. I'm John Leonard. I think we've met a couple of times before. I'm the president of Lambda Alpha, and we're really pleased to have you with us today.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. I think you may know my wife, Jill. Does that name sound familiar?
It does, yeah.
She's been to the farms. So
have you been to the site before?
I have not. I've been to the site that you used to have, and I'm not sure it's still there over by the school. On did you have weren't you working a piece of land at the front of?
That was a long time ago. Farm on Hurley Way.
Yeah. Right. Hurley. Right. I'd been there a few times.
No longer in our queue.
Well, you're doing great work, and we're pleased to have you on board today. So
great. Thank you. Nice.
Let the masses assemble. I think I'm not sure how big a crowd we'll have today, but we're thankful that you're with us.
Great. Thanks.
Give this a couple more minutes to pull together. Suzanne, anybody in our waiting room, or how big a group are you? Are they starting to assemble?
Yes, they're all coming in now.
Okay, great, thanks. Hi, David, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you, John?
I'm doing super, thanks for asking.
Yep, already.
Just had a great board meeting. How are you, Donna?
I'm good, John. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Just a couple more minutes, and then we'll get started. I love to hear the dog in the background. That's perfect. Why don't we get started and allow other people to continue to join as we get past the 12 o'clock noon hour. My name is John Leonard. I'm with Leonard Development Company, and I'm the president of Lambda Alpha for 2020. And I have a wonderful and exceptional board of directors working with me on the board this year. I'm very thankful for all their efforts. Naz Alikan, John Weber, Randy Getz, who is our program chair. Naz is the vice president. John is the secretary. Bridget Powers is our membership chair. Doug Dransfield, Val Toppenberg, and Tim Yeomans are also on the board, and I'm appreciative of all their efforts. Louise Walker is our treasurer, and Steve Fleming and Nancy Park are both past presidents and are, as well as Tim, and our directors at large. Louise is our treasurer. So I wanted to thank all of our board members for their energy and their time to make Lambda Alpha Sacramento the strongest Lambda Alpha in the country. We have about 140 members currently, and we'll be welcoming 9 new members in January, 9 new initiates that have been embraced by LAI Sacramento, and will become part of our membership. I wanted to speak to a couple of items that before we get started with our presentation, and I introduce Randy Getz. First, I wanted to let everyone know that this COVID-19 has affected the way we operate, obviously, and meeting via Zoom is working, but it's a little bit difficult. We're missing out on some of the social aspects of our business community, and for that, it's a bit frustrating. We are also missing the lunches and the opportunity to socialize at the Sutter Club, but we're going to try to address that in a simple way today by extending the meeting beyond our close of the formal meeting and leave the Zoom meeting open for another 10 minutes and allow communications among the members if that's desirable. We'll try it out. We haven't done it this way before, but we think it might be an opportunity for people to interact and actually even have some private chats, which are hopefully, I believe, are going to be enabled for this meeting. At the end, you can click on the bottom of the page. There's an opportunity to have a chat, and then you can communicate directly with someone if you'd like to say hello to them or just a general conversation. I also wanted to share that the chapter financially is doing well, or at least okay, given the current situation. We have our chapter thrives on our lunch meetings and our membership. I wanted to share with we just completed our board meeting, and we will be anxiously awaiting your renewal in January. So when you receive your request to renew your Lambda Alpha membership, we strongly encourage you to respond quickly so that because we need that operating capital. And I wanted to share that we're okay, but we are missing out on some of our other opportunities for capital. So this is an important component to our budget on an annual basis. I also like everyone to strongly consider sponsoring our lunch Zoom meetings that we will continue to have until it's safe for us to gather in person. If you're interested in having a low dollar sponsorship, we'd be pleased to have you contact Suzanne Blackledge directly and embrace that opportunity. So with that, I have one other comment. We have a great speaker today in Shawn Harrison with Soilborne Farms. I'm looking forward to his presentation. I also wanted to let you all know that we have confirmed that Rex Heim will be joining us next month for our Zoom meeting. Rex will be speaking to the split tax roll, which is going to be on the November ballot. And I think he'll have an impressive and important and very timely presentation for us on September 22nd, next month's meeting. So with that, I would like to introduce you to Randy Getz with CBRE. Randy is our program chair and will take the time to introduce Shawn Harrison. Randy?
But first, let's hear from our sponsors. We have 2 today. Economic and Planning Systems and Murphy Austin. I know Lexi is going to be speaking for Russell Austin, who got a better offer today. But who's going to be speaking for Economic and Planning Systems? David?
Yes.
Okay, would you like to lead off, please? Because your name was above, yours was first, and then Lexi can talk about Murphy Austin and the good that they are doing for the world.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's the great thing about LAI. Pretty much everybody on this Zoom call is doing something great for the world. And, you know, we've also been involved with LAI International, and it's really interesting to see what those folks are trying to do. I would just mention that we recently did a global webinar on the impacts of COVID-19 for LAI International. So if any of you would like to receive a copy of those PowerPoints or the YouTube recording, just let me know. I'd be happy to send those around. And it's a good overall treatment of the topic. And at EPS, we're happy to sponsor any and all LAI activities. It's a fantastic organization, one of the best. And so I'll basically yield my time to the speaker. No need to go on and on. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to sponsor, and I'm really looking forward to today's presentation.
Thank you. That's very gracious of you. Lexi?
Thank you, Randy. Lexi Howard from Murphy, Austin, Adams, Schoenfeld on behalf of myself and also members Russell Austin and Suzanne Hennessy. Happy to be a sponsor, happy to see you all here and cede the balance of our time to the speaker whom we are thrilled to support today.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Let me introduce our speaker, Shawn Harrison, whom I first met on a career panel at Country Day. Our daughter was a lifer there, and for reasons that continue to escape me, I was asked to talk about a career in commercial real estate, and I suspect my comments dissuaded almost everyone in the room from ever going into the field. But I became aware of Shawn and his good works, and so I'm very pleased that he was in a position to join us today to talk about what he and his team are doing. For those who are unfamiliar with Shawn and what he does, he's the co-founder and executive director of Soil-Born Farms, which is an urban agriculture and education project which serves the greater Sacramento area. Through its urban farms and associated activities, his organization allows youth and adults to discover and participate in a system of food production and distribution that promotes healthy living and nurtures the environment. Probably more important in times of COVID than ever before, because we all need to stay as healthy as possible. Soil-Born Farms is committed to developing programs focused on organic food production, healthy food education, and access to healthy and nutritious foods for everyone. Since its inception in 2000, Soil-Born Farms has created and supported the development of 5 urban farms in Sacramento, piloted innovative food markets and farm stands, engaged thousands of area youth in hands-on farming and cooking activities, supported the development of school and community gardens, and helped shape community awareness and support for responsible agriculture. Shawn's been directly involved in the development of sustainable food systems and healthier communities since 1993. He holds a Master's of Science degree in International Agriculture Development from UC Davis, and is the recipient of several notable awards, including Valley Vision's Regional Environmental Legacy Award and the UC Davis Award of Distinction. Shawn was born and raised in Sacramento. He lives and works here and is married and has 2 daughters. I'm pleased to introduce Shawn to LAI.
Well, everyone, thanks for having me. This is my first Zoom presentation, so you'll have to forgive me. The best way to talk about all of these things that we care about is in person. Of course, we can't do that right now. And I would just speak to probably the Zoom fatigue that everybody's experiencing right now. So I do apologize that we're, talking about this topic online, but nonetheless, it is an important topic of our time, and I'm really glad to speak to the issues of food in our community, and I really appreciate the introduction. And I think that I'm going to share my screen with you in a second, but just a couple of opening comments, and then I'll do just a little mini presentation, orient you on the project, and then we're going to talk really about some current issues in food that I think all of you may already be thinking about, or if not, this will prime the pump, so to speak, which I'm really hoping will happen. So just a couple personal things. Randy mentioned that I was born here in Sacramento, and I think the opening thing that I would state, amongst many things that Sacramento is really built to do. One of them certainly is growing food. And most folks are may be aware of this, but some may not, is that California as a whole produces, the vast majority of specialty crops, primarily fruits and vegetables that feed not only the rest of the country, but they feed, places all around the world, including all the rice crops that come out of this area. They're going all over the place. We have the climate for it. We've got UC Davis, which is one of the best ag universities in the world. We have this Mediterranean climate that allows us to grow food year round. And we have some history doing it. Though the context for that production has largely happened as an export industry. So believe it or not, even though we have been growing food since the middle of the last century, most of it has been destined for other locations rather than for the people that live here, which is part of the discussion that I will be having with you today. But let's start with Soilborn for a second so you can kind of get a little sense of what this organization is, and then we will jump into the some of the bigger topics. So let me share my screen with all of you. And again, I can't see everybody's faces, so we'll hopefully, I'll get a sense if I've got some head nodding or whatever. Our first farm, so we are a farm and education center, as Randy said. We're a 501c3, started in 2000. And our first farm, for some of you may have been with us or we've been on your radar, was actually on Hurley Way. Used to be a middle school called Jonas Salk Middle School. That was our first farm for the first 8 years, 2000 to 2008. And then we, after some visioning and searching, we landed on this amazing asset. Some of you may ride the American River Bike Trail. You see the American River there. That's about mile 15 of the American River Bike Trail, where the river forks a bit. And then if you're going just downriver from us, you'd be at Riverbend. And just upriver from us is Hagen Park and up towards the Sunrise Reach. So we have a historically 300-acre farm here that dates back to the 1870s. Our task for us is a 55-acre chunk of that is to develop a center for food health and the environment. It is a very rare resource in our region. And to the credit of all of the people that created the American River Parkway, this farm was folded into the American River Parkway and now is permanently protected and is a public amenity owned by the public, managed through Sacramento Regional Parks. And Soilborn is the steward of this facility and has been tasked with creating a publicly accessible facility. So this gives you a little bird's eye view of the actual property. It's got one of the best vistas left in the kind of urban core of Sacramento. You can see for miles. What you're experiencing is sort of that blend of urban residential, which you can't see in this picture, but is certainly there. And then the farm itself, which is sort of the urban ag interface. And then we have the wild spaces of the American River Parkway, which includes a restored creek, forest area, and then large open fields and other habitat areas of the American River Parkway. So it's a really rare resource, and it's a minor miracle, in my opinion, that it's still here and has survived development and was never mined hydraulically for gold. It somehow withstood all of that. And in 2005, we began to advocate for the permanent preservation of this place as a farm and education center, of which we subsequently were awarded the long-term lease and began to create it as such. It is a beautiful mix of agricultural fields, habitat, and then infrastructure where we run a variety of programs focused on connecting our food, our health, and the environment. And just a little personal part of this in terms of why Soilborn exists is I myself, having grown up here, there was two dominant things. One positive, I had the great fortune of hanging out along the American River all the way from a child until adulthood, and fell in love with the environment and had, some connections with this property. And then as a child in Sacramento, if some of you lived here for a long time, you might have witnessed some of the early years where rice fields were still being burned and air quality would worsen periodically due to agricultural activities. And I myself suffered from some chronic asthma as a child and some other health-related issues that were triggered, by some environmental stuff. And both those two sort of factors influenced heavily my direction in life, which ultimately landed me with Soilborn, which was the idea to create a farm and education center in the places where we all live and work, the urban environment, and do a project that not only promoted health and well-being, but also promoted and advocated for a style of agriculture that was ecological and sustainable. And in many respects, we hope to motivate individuals like all of you on this call to maybe start growing some of your own food, recognizing that historically we've really, our relationship with food has really, changed quite a bit, particularly since the 1950s, when we started to kind of go towards a fast food culture and agriculture started to really grow in size, and we started to see a reduction in family farms and sort of that intimate connection between our producer and the eater. So there's a whole host of things that motivated us, and that's why we created the project 20 years ago. And literally, some of you heard this story, we put a note in a mailbox of a woman named Elizabeth Collins, asked her if we could grow on her property in exchange for food. It was a long time ago. I was younger. I've got more gray hair at this point. But that's how the project started, and it was really about reconnecting people with food and getting people excited about where their food comes from, and what a journey it's been over the last 20 years in this work. It's really been exciting, and the food space has really begun to evolve in Sacramento to the point where we have, branding like, Farm to Fork, and an emerging locally serving agriculture, and a very vibrant urban agricultural scene that I'm going to talk a little bit more about. But I did want to really draw attention to that issue of really the personal, because this is my home, and if Sacramento can't, grab the horns of agriculture and make it their own and make it a world-class, system that others can learn from, in the bigger picture, if we can't do that, if Sacramento can't do it, it's very hard to do it in other places as well as we could. But the other is that we need models. We need model food systems for other places to look at, because resources are becoming more scarce. We need better planned communities, and we all have to eat, which is of super importance. So I'm going to just click through a couple of these things, and then we're going to shift to some bigger picture conversations. We run youth programming. We work with about 20,000 people each year, youth and adults. Our primary target population is our children, connecting them with the earth and with food and gardening and growing food. We get them out there, both youth and adults, and everybody gets their hands dirty. The whole idea is about skills building and getting people, reacquainted with their food and where it comes from and how to grow it. And a big part of our program is not only at the ranch, but we run school garden programs throughout the region, and really have developed some pretty best practice schools that we use as models, and then for replication purposes are helping to build a whole network of school gardens. Just give you a little feel for what happens out here. This is a farm stand that we run on Saturdays. Not right now during COVID, but normally we would. Okay, I'm going to click out of this, and we're going to talk about some bigger issues here. And I'm hoping to leave a little room for questions, Randy, if that's okay. So if you guys see me going too long, I'm going to set my timer here. just so I don't go over. But you guys will tell me if I am. So let's just kind of, I mean, I want to frame this into possibility, but there are some issues that we are dealing with that, you know, that need to be stated in terms of current challenges. So, you know, thinking in big terms, we are seeing the massive amount of human population moving into the cities. That's without a doubt. And so the places where we live and work, you know, are, you know, where a lot of the investments and taxpayer dollars and power resides. And the best cities, in my opinion, are the cities that, or regions that, take care of those, of the basic human amenities. And we're talking about housing and transportation and jobs and healthcare and public safety and clean water and clean air, right? And if you think of all those examples that I just gave, most of them really involve pretty intensive planning, many of them self-taxation for funding purposes, commissions and panels and whole, you know, locally, you know, controlled or certainly locally influenced plans that help us to execute and you know, ensure that we have all of those basic amenities for, you know, healthy living in the city. And of those basic amenities, you may have maybe have heard that there's an omission there, and that omission is the food system. So the way I like to kind of talk about it is, imagine if, you know, we can use any one of those examples, but let's just use, you know, our school system, right? We've got school boards, and we've got, you know, taxation systems, both at the local and state level, and, you know, elementary and middle and high school and community college, and all of these things to educate our population, which is a basic human right that we've all determined. But if you tried to compare that to the food system, you'd be hard pressed to see any of that intentional organization, certainly at the local level. It's almost completely market driven in terms of how we access food, which is not a bad thing. But at the local level, we start to see breakdowns that start to impact our health and well-being. So you'll see in some neighborhoods, inequitable access to healthy fruits and vegetables. In a more affluent neighborhood, you'll see good grocery stores, because that's where grocery stores are going to place themselves, because there's the demand and buying power of a more affluent population to, you know, keep their business in operation. And then if you go into low-income neighborhoods, the exact opposite will be true. You'll largely see predominance of small grocers, you know, mostly ethnic stores and convenience stores, and the predominance of that food tends to be definitely processed, fast food oriented, and oftentimes more expensive. So that's just one example of what the current system, in the absence of local discussion and planning and sort of investment, leads to some inequitable situations in our community. We have no local funding source for the food system. And so when you think about, you know, this sort of basic human amenity, right? We have all got to eat, and preferably we all want to get healthy food into our bodies. It's led to not only this inequitable distribution, but health issues. Chronic disease in this country is largely related to what we put into our bodies, right? 70% of the chronic disease in this country is related to our diet, amazingly enough. You know, bigger picture, not only, you know, diet and exercise, but you think about learning, and, you know, if people don't have good food in their bellies and they're going to school hungry, or they're going to school, you know, with calories in their body, but undernourished from a nutrient mineral standpoint, they're not going to perform. They're not going to become that next workforce that we really need, those healthy individuals that can thrive in our community. So these are big issues, and what we're drawing attention to, Soilborne and some of our other partners, is sort of this lack of intentionality at the local level, a lack of planning that we're engaged in to really articulate a vision and develop some practical solutions to solve this moving forward. There's some other larger things that are affecting our country right now and our region. And again, I'll move past these because I know it's all depressing, unfortunately. But at the local level, most folks aren't aware, but the city of Sacramento has been coordinating calls for the last 3 or 4 months during COVID. One of those calls is really helping the emergency food providers to fill the gaps. And we are feeding in this region well over 500,000 people each month with emergency food services. These are kids through schools and food banks. So you think, I don't know where we're at right now as a region, 2.2, 2.5 million people. That's a large percentage of our total population is relying on emergency food. Of course, that's been exacerbated by COVID and the economic impacts of COVID. And then we've also seen breakdowns in the distribution system. So you can imagine as a farmer in our region, we're beginning to shift to local food production. Then all of a sudden, bam, all the restaurants close, right? Or they're unlimited delivery only or pickup only stuff. And, all those farmers that are in the local food system, if they're not selling to grocers and the market is very different between a restaurant tour and a grocer. So, we saw major disruptions in the food system nationally and locally, where grocery stores were hard pressed to find certain fruits and vegetables and get them on their stores. Farmers were left scrambling for excess crops, and we saw at the big commodity level, milk getting dumped and all kinds of eggs and meat and shortages and all kinds of interesting things that in the big picture we want to mitigate against in times of crisis like this, and pandemic and fires and most recently tornadoes where millions and millions of bushels of corn are left exposed because our silos got blown apart by tornadoes. So you can see these have massive repercussions for the human population. And in our area, we certainly have a lot of agricultural activity, and it would stand to reason that we'd want to start thinking about this a little bit more carefully. And then lastly, in terms of just a big shift, just to, over the last 150 so years, if you go back to 1870, 50% of the employment in this country was folks working on the farm. And then we go to 1900, 38%. Go to 1950, 20%. And then today, food and agriculture combined, distribution and culinary and farmers, it comprises about 11% of our total economy. But the actual farmers, boots on the ground, represents only about 1.3% of the total US working population. So this tiny percentage of people are feeding all of us. And yet we are not spending much intentional time, certainly at the local, down to the neighborhood level, really thinking about how this is all going to work, how we want to design it in a way where it's going to work for all of us. And then it's going to promote health and well-being. And it's going to, really highlight the cultural uniqueness of this region and the unique crops of this region, and serve as this best practice, model for other places around the country. So this is what the landscape that we're in, and there are, in the face of all those challenges, a lot of really cool stuff happening that I wanted to point out or lift up a bit on the call. Because actually over the next year to 2 years, you're going to see some of these things emerging. And I think we would be well served to be aware that these things are happening because they're going to transform our food system in the Sacramento region. So first and foremost, there is a governance structure that's being developed. It's very nascent in its form, but we're kind of thinking there's a few basic amenities that need to be brought to bear on the food system. One of them is a leadership structure. So the best example I could give, and it's not necessarily a good example, but you think of just like something like the arts, right? The arts has a local leadership structure. It has, funding sources that it can tap into, at least during most times. And it has a commission, and it has, in a community that is connected and are advocating and, for the inclusion of the arts in our community. So in the food system, we need that leadership structure for local organizing purposes. We have the federal and we have California, level agricultural organizations, but they are not necessarily involved in the local architecting of the food system. So in the next year, you're going to see a governance structure begin to emerge, a leadership structure. It probably will not have any power beyond the power of the individuals that are participating at this point, but it will be a governance structure that begins to articulate a plan for our food system in the 6-county region. We'll probably start with Sacramento County. Secondarily is we're looking at a funding mechanism. So most of you are familiar with the Sacramento Community Regional Foundation. They have subsequently created a thing called the Healthy Food Fund, which doesn't have too much money in it right now, but the whole idea is that we will develop a funding method, a funding tool of sorts to make consistent investments in the food system, everything from, emergency food investments to education programming to supporting the development of infrastructure like distribution and aggregation centers and farmland preservation. We also are doing some interesting coordination at the neighborhood level. So when we think about like real world examples of things that are happening in our community, there are a few now that we can point towards that are working pretty good. So let me just elaborate on that for a second. Imagine, you're just you could pick any neighborhood. The work that I'm going to lift up is in South Sacramento, down in the lower reaches of South Sacramento. It's called the Avenues, largely Latino, low income. And we picked one school there, Pacific Elementary, and created a hub of sorts around that school to begin to layer in a variety of practices, interventions, activities to sort of reshape the food culture of that school and the immediate community around that school. So Sacramento Food Bank and Family Services brought in emergency food distribution. A corner store within walking distance to the school was completely reinvented into a WIC store for healthy fruits and vegetables. A community garden was built. Some home garden construction happened. A whole school garden program was created at Pacific Elementary, including it's kind of a parallel healthy lunch program. And the combination of all of those things completely changed the sort of culture of that school, so that we can kind of lift it up and talk about how it's impacted test scores and vandalism rates at the school and parent participation, administrator buy-in, teacher buy-in, district buy-in. All of a sudden, over the last 5 years, this school has completely transformed from really a low-performing school with a lot of issues to a school where the kids have a sense of hope and the teachers are really, happy to be working there. Of course, COVID right now has put a dent in some of that progress, but again, it's an example that we can point towards. And then similarly, on the emergency food side, some really innovative planning has started, led by Sacramento Food Bank and Family Services, which is one of our partners, to create what we call NFANs. These are, it's basically food networks. They broke the county, because the county is now their whole service area, and they broke the county into these different networks or zones, where all of the different food pantries that they work with, which number over 240, are now coordinating services. And they're coordinating dates, days of week where food's distributed, and diversity of food, and to providing real humanizing, distribution style, farmers market style distributions. And that coordination and layering has, which actually occurred well in advance of COVID, has actually allowed that sector of the food system to mobilize very quickly and get food to our neediest population, which I as I mentioned earlier, is quite significant. And the numbers are expected to grow during this winter months as the economy flags from COVID. And then another best practice that I was hoping to lift up is something called the Food Systems Action Plan. This is actually something that was facilitated through Valley Vision, which I'm on the board of. And we are actually going to start an updated version of that. It's about 5 years old. But that Food Systems Action Plan is essentially the roadmap for the leadership structure. So we'd have funding mechanism, we'd have a leadership structure, we'd have local examples to kind of point towards, and then we'd have a roadmap. So this Food Systems Action Plan would look at production, distribution, education, emergency food, policy, and subgroups of that representing those different sectors would inform the larger collaborative in terms of policy directions, investments in the food system, and the like. So it's a long way of saying that there's some pretty exciting stuff happening in the food system. And then from Soilborne's perspective, I would also state that we're seeing a massive interest, increased interest in people growing their own food. And while you might think that that's insignificant, you only have to go back to World War II, where 40% of all of the domestic food production and needs were being met through victory gardens, as farmers were focusing on feeding our soldiers abroad, to know that that's a positive trend in our opinion. So Soilborne's responding to that need by increasing our programming and building new infrastructure so that we can teach the skills and get people excited about growing some of their own foods in the urban spaces and sharing that with their neighbors, which is really exciting and one of the main reasons why we exist. So that is the kind of the overall little taste of what's happening in our community. And I'm personally very excited about it. It's something that as eaters, we all have a stake in. And it certainly is not incidental. When you think about the vital things that we need to survive in this world, I mean, after air to breathe and water to drink, food is right there, right? And so in times of crisis and in times of abundance, a food system that works well, both urban and rural, is going to be one of our buffers against disruptions, and is going to be one of our best strategies to have a long and healthy life and a healthy economy. And so we're hoping that some of these movements and interest will continue, and that we'll get some good traction over the next couple of years. So with that, I'm going to stop. And if folks have questions, please feel free to jump in.
Do we have any questions for Shawn?
I have a question, Shawn.
Hi, David.
This is John. Oh, go ahead, David, please. Sorry.
Thank you. So I hope I didn't miss this part, but this Food Systems Action Plan, did that originate or does it relate at all to the strategy that SACOG developed a few years ago, known as the RUCs? And then also, I happen to serve on the mayor's Commission for Climate Change, the effort between Sacramento and West Sac, and there was quite a bit of discussion of food distribution systems in terms of being a more sustainable society. And I'm wondering if you interacted with that group as well. And I guess the bigger question is this something that can be scaled up so that other metro areas could take similar approaches? Thanks.
Yeah, so the answer to your first question is there was high levels of collaboration between RUCs and the Food Systems Action Plan. And even before that, there was work that predated RUCs that informed kind of how we were doing our planning process through Valley Vision in this case. And the whole intention, I mean, while it is to build, our own blueprint of sorts for the food system, in the bigger picture, it really is to try to serve as a model for other regions, for sure. We feel like if we should be able to innovate around our food system, and then others can learn from our example, and where their conditions match ours, they can innovate in similar ways. I mean, there's not many regions with a combination of environmental and policy and university assets that we have for sure. But that is the intention for sure. And then I think there was one more part of that miss?
The climate action plan.
Yeah.
Wondering if you interacted with that group at all as you formulated your plan.
They have Valley Vision. They're involved in some of that as well, with the mayor's office and certainly with West Sac. So West Sac and Sacramento are probably the two counties that are collaborating the most heavily right now on this planning. So which is exciting, but we need to get others at the table as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. John.
Shawn, I was intrigued by and inspired by your comments about the school in South Sacramento that you've embraced, and was wondering, are there other opportunities like that on your radar? Are there multiple schools that you're influencing in this way? And what does it take to accomplish that as it relates to both financial backing as well as school and parent participation? What's it look like? How does it work?
We have 8 schools that fall into sort of the same category as Pacific Elementary. We have 4 in Rancho Cordova where our facility is located, and then we have 4 in South Sacramento. That number was actually greater, but then we've sort of weaned ourselves away from a few of the schools, and they're operating fairly independently. And then we have a network of other schools that we support through teacher trainings and resources, online resources, curriculum development, and things of that nature. The interesting thing about it is that, John, you asked like, how do you make this happen? And we've had the good fortune there's a collection of partners that do this. Center for Food Literacy, Soil-Borne Farms, Health Education Council, Sacramento Food Bank and Family Services, a host of others have benefited in South Sacramento by the funding initiative that the California Endowment has made over the last 10 years called Building Healthy Communities. So we've had the good fortune of 10 years of funding to really navigate through, best practices, through failures, and then continue to make forward progress on that. So that's been pretty unheard of. I mean, you just don't see that commitment by funders very often. So that was a game changer. And then in Rancho Cordova, the city of Rancho Cordova has a local funding initiative called Measure H, which was a sales tax. I think it was a half or quarter cent sales tax that is used for reinvestment in the community. And that's provided us funding to kickstart the programming in Rancho Cordova, because none of these things pay for themselves. And then similarly, if you look at Sacramento, City Unified School District, they're in deep financial woes. So, maybe the idealistic part of me was like, well, we'll build the programs, we'll prove them out. And then the districts will be, they'll be overjoyed by the impact it's having on test scores and student culture, and they'll self-fund it. That didn't happen, it's not to say that it wouldn't happen. They love the programming, but they don't have the resources to do it. So that's why we're starting to turn our eye towards other types of funding mechanisms so that we can invest consistently in the food system. And then it's not where in good times we're kind of making progress in a few areas, and then in difficult times there's only a few parts of the food system that get attention. We want to make consistent investments in the education spaces, right? Emergency food, policy, retail, production, so that it all moves forward, in a real positive direction.
Excellent, thank you. I have just one last half follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of teaching people how to fish or grow food is meaningful here, and I think that's something that we can all take from this. I also wanted to ask you, we're having a little trouble with our tomatoes this year. I was wondering if you had any insight on that.
Yeah, tomatoes. We're having a great tomato year, John. So, to the point of people growing food, the urban environment's not going to feed everybody. That's not what we're talking about here. But if you're living in the city, it can be a really powerful way to stay connected to your food and it can affect your bottom line if you've got a little bit of space to grow your own food. It keeps you connected, gets you good food in your bodies. And like I said earlier, we're having unprecedented interest in people learning how to grow food right now. It's super exciting for us, and so we're positioning ourselves to meet that demand. But with the case of tomatoes, make sure you got a good calcium can be a problem. So a good amendment of maybe some gypsum, good organic matter, some nice compost.
We need to do some crop rotation. I think we've got a wonderful potato patch, and cucumbers and others, but we'll work on the tomatoes.
Yeah, tomatoes infrequent deep watering, John. Don't water them too much.
Perfect. I'll let Jill know.
Yeah.
Nancy Park has a question.
Hi, I actually have two questions. One, does your mission or actions overlap at all with the Center for Land-Based Learning, which is based out of Davis and does farmer training? One of our members is the executive director for that, Mary Kimball. And then what interaction do you have with the local farmers? And by that, I don't necessarily mean like the CSAs, but we have people who farm, 400 acres of rice and, a variety of different things, but are the long-time farming interests. How much interaction do you have with those interests or stakeholders?
Yeah, well, on the first question with Center for Land-Based Learning and Mary Kimball, they're one of our most important partners. I've been working with Mary for over 20 years. In fact, she was one of the first people I sat down with when I was in graduate school at UC Davis. And she had just gotten involved with Center for Land-Based Learning. I picked her brain, and they've rolled, and we started, and now we're making headway. And specifically on their farmer training program, we helped them to develop an state-accredited farmer training program, and now they run that show, which is the first in the state. And then we have two veterans that are actually participants in that program that are apprentices at our farm. So we have a pretty intimate connection with them, and the whole idea is to we got to build that pipeline of new farmers. And so Soilborn serves as a training facility for them, but the Center for Land-Based Learning runs the whole teaching program. And then as it pertains to the larger farmer, we have the blessing of a diversity of farmers in our region. Some of them are, as I mentioned earlier, extremely focused on export-oriented agriculture, right? And so we don't have too much interaction with them, but the ones that are operating in the export market and also in the locally serving market, we find ourselves in conversation quite a bit. Some of them are large retail serving, like the Rayleighs and serving large grocers and distribution networks and schools and the like. And so we definitely look to them for guidance and input, particularly when we're doing some of the food systems action planning, and really talking about the issues that are impacting them from environmentally and production and distribution type systems and infrastructure that may be missing, access to markets and what's getting in the way of that. That dialogue is pretty rich. Soilborn specifically connects with a lot of smaller local producers, and interestingly enough, we hit, and actually a lot of farmers are dealing with this right now. We hit the COVID period, and if any of you have been to the farm, we typically would have been running a pretty vibrant farm stand, direct to consumer distribution on Saturdays, but we had to shut that down. And so we, on the spot, innovated and developed an online marketplace on which we do a drive-through distribution on Saturdays, and now are procuring from a couple dozen different producers in the area, and providing a marketplace and marketing opportunity for their products. So everything from pasta that's being grown on local farms like Full Belly, or fruits and that people grow better than we do. So all of that is now being featured in our marketplace, and sales have been probably double what we had been doing previously. So small steps, but nonetheless, the farmers are they're a big part of the equation, and there's some that are struggling right now. So, particularly with the smoke and the COVID and changing markets, unpredictable markets. It's a challenging time to be a farmer, to say the least.
Additional questions? Jack, you'll have to unmute, Jack. There you go.
Yeah. So Shawn, great presentation. And I love the range of supporting those that don't have access to even enough food, let alone quality food, and teaching younger kids to sort of the responsibility and ability to grow food. And you touched on one of the things I was interested in is how much the victory garden concept is coming back, and you kind of touched on that. So I won't ask any more questions about that, but you know, where people have choice on going to Safeway or going to their backyard per se. But I am interested in, we hear a lot lately, even over the last decade or two, about pathogens related to food, you know, recalls of onions or potatoes or spinach or whatever. And is that a function of large scale farming, or is that a function of we can test things better? We know it exists in our food. It's always been there. And then what are you doing about it at Soil-Born Farms? It's, you know, it's one of those things that you would think it's shouldn't be part of the food supply, but some of it's from nature and some of it's introduced. What's kind of the story, especially COVID and post-COVID? We're all going to be a little more interested in things like that. So what's your thought on that, and what's Soil-Born's approach on that?
Yeah, I mean, to your first point is these things have always, many of them have existed in our food system and, you know, various quantities for, you know, since we've been farming. It's really about oftentimes the scale and style of agriculture where we start to see like a big outbreak or, you know, of some of these things. It's usually manifested, honestly, at the processing facility. So, you know, you're seeing, you know, cross mingling of crops that are coming from, you know, several places. And then, you know, there's a contamination at the processing facility. And that's where it becomes like these big recalls and problems are, but to that end, you know, my 2 cents on this is that there's been at the federal and state level with CDFA and others, there's a lot more regulatory, you know, compliance that's now required of diversity of farms, where, you know, the style of production, whether you're growing organically or conventionally, rules, procedures, paperwork, tracking it down to the micro field, you know, like different plots where we can show tracking of, you know, source, so that you can pinpoint where the problem is. I mean, for even small farms like Soil-Born, we have to be compliant with those new regulations as well. And, you know, that applies to the way that we pack our food and, you know, have to manage our packing facilities and cleaning equipment out and things of that nature. So high levels of new practices at the farm level, and then tracking and paperwork. And so that, you know, in the event an outbreak occurs, that you can pinpoint it and shut things down more quickly. It's where things get aggregated, and then oftentimes, you know, it may be coming from a large production, you know, operation where they're just growing one thing, and the possibility of that one crop being, you know, contaminated and then going to facility, it becomes a big issue pretty quickly, right? Only other thing I would offer on this topic is that, you know, in my opinion, you know, not to, you know, put a bad light on anyone, but it shines an opportunity on locally serving agriculture, where the eater knows where their food is coming from, right? And so the more retailers, you know, educate their consumers about where it's coming from, the more opportunities for eaters to connect directly from their farmer and know how they're growing their food and where it's coming from and what practices they're using. That's a beautiful model where it's possible. It's not always possible, but it certainly is part of the thing we'd like to see happen more here in the Valley. for sure. Billions of dollars of opportunity for locally serving agriculture in our region. We are barely scratching the surface in that part of the food sector.
We are up against 1 o'clock, and unless there's an objection, I would like to, first of all, thank Lexi Howard and Murphy Austin Adams Schoenfeld LLP for their generous hosting of and sponsorship of today's speaker. I'd also like to thank Economic and Planning Systems and David Zender for his generous support and sponsorship of the meeting today. Thank you both very much. We're very grateful. A special thanks to Shawn Harrison. What an interesting, compelling story you and your team are telling. And we're grateful that you're here in Sacramento, and I think I speak for everyone when I say that.
Thank you, Randy. Really
Here,
appreciate
here.
it. Be well, everyone.
Sorry, go ahead.
I too want to thank David and Lexi and Shawn as well. That was a compelling presentation, and we're all appreciative. We need to know more about our local ability to grow our food, and I think it's a benefit to everybody in the community. We're going to leave this Zoom meeting channel on for a few minutes in case anybody wants to have an opportunity to interact directly. And with that, I thank you all for participating. We look forward to seeing you next month when we have Rex Heim with us. Shawn, thank you very much for your time. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
John, my tomatoes are doing just fine.
I honestly can tell you, we had beautiful, lovely plants. We produced a lot of some tomatoes, and others just didn't fruit much. And we're still trying to figure it out. It might be an overwatering issue. It might be we had lots of tomatoes, just not as many as we're used to. We're used to tomatoes three meals a day, and at this time of year. So.
Hey, John.
Well, I did.
John, do you ever pinch your tips back?
Pinch the tips of the
plants. You want to regularly pinch your tips back and keep them from just growing leaves and force them to try to recreate themselves. That's what the fruit is.
Okay. Perfect example. Good idea.
My cukes were a bust, though.
Strong suggested calcium.
I went to open our chickens this morning. We have 6 chickens in our backyard, and I found 5 cucumbers had been donated to them by my wife yesterday. They got a little bitter, so the cucumbers are now for the chickens instead of for us. Anyway,
some chickens in there.
Yeah, we're fortunate to have a little plot of land that we farm here in our backyard with some raised beds. So
that's fantastic, John.
Huge amount of potatoes this year. The potatoes were unbelievable. So that's pretty fun. All started from cuttings.
As people it's stuck inside, the garden has become a haven for insanity, for sure.
We have 5 large raised beds in our backyard, all irrigated, that I built a few years ago, and they're high production.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Shawn, where was that first place that you dropped off the note that you had the lady that allowed you to come farm? Where was that?
If you're going on Watt Avenue, take a left on Hurley. As you cross over Morse Avenue, there's a school there. I think it's a K through 8 now. Mm-hmm. And we front that school. It's kind of part of the property you can see from Hurley Way, and then it bends around. So we were there from 2000 to 2008, and a woman who's still alive, she's in her mid-90s, Elizabeth Collins, owns that property for the last 50 some odd years. That's where we started.
Cool.
With a credit card and lots of idealistic ideas.
Can't believe it was 20 years ago already.
I know.
That's impressive. It's
It goes by
impressive.
so fast. So, yeah.
That looks like it was a cool event. You had the photo with the lights on the awnings and stuff. Is that like a fundraiser event that you had normally?
Yeah, that's our autumn equinox celebration, which under normal years would be in about 2 weeks. We'll miss it for the first time in 18 years. It's our big fundraiser, and all the chefs come out. Anybody who's been to it, I think it's the best food event in Sacramento. It's awesome.
Hey, Shawn, it's just the best event. It's just being there is pretty cool, especially as the evening goes. You know, it's a late evening, fall evening. It's just wonderful. So We're going to miss that this year.
Me too. Me too. We'll be back. We'll be back. But yeah, Nancy, if you're pay attention right around the equinox when we have it each fall, and it is a celebration that you don't want to miss. It's got to experience it.
Sounds cool. Yeah, it sounds really cool. I'm going to look at your online market too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you should. That's a good way to support local farmers and the project, and you don't even have to get out of your car.
Shawn, one last question. You had, I think you said you have a little over 300 acres adjacent to the river. Is that right?
Well, the historic property is 300 acres. Our official lease is 55. Yeah.
And how much of that is in production now?
Most of it's in some form of production. I would say that the vast majority of it, well, that's not true. About 10 acres of trees, about 7 acres of veg crops, and then the rest is in some kind of pasture.
Okay.
And then we have a big restored creek that we recently did too. That's about
And
10.
do you have access to river water or municipal water or well or a combination?
Yeah, that's the rare thing about this property because it dates, back to the 1870s. We have historic rights on the American River, which is almost unheard of.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So
That's
we've got a
great.
pump down there, and yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to move on to my next event, but I really appreciate everyone participating. If there's anybody that wants to hang out here, I encourage that. Shawn, we're very, very appreciative of your presentation today, and thank you all who are still here for participating as well.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
You will.
Thanks so much. Take care.